I'm Camille Whitaker, 32, and I quietly built a luxury hotel empire, 5 properties across the Midwest. But despite all that, to my family, I was always the one who didn't quite measure up. So when my father's birthday dinner took place at my own hotel, my sister actually blocked me at the door. My mother leaned in and whispered, "Don't embarrass us." They had no idea whose name was on the building until that night when everything changed. What followed wasn't revenge. It was the start of a reckoning and a long overdue reclamation. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, like and subscribe. This story is for you. Growing up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, I always felt like the odd one out in my own family. My parents, Gerald and Evelyn Whitaker, owned a modestly successful accounting firm that gave us a solid upper-middle-class life. My younger sister, Brielle, just 2 years behind me, the golden child, almost from birth. She was the picture of what my parents admired. Pretty in a classic way, well-liked, and a natural at doing what was expected. Keeping up appearances, following the traditional route, and never causing waves. I was different, more inward, more driven in ways my family simply didn't relate to. While Brielle was off cheering at football games and dating the team captain, I was building a small business of my own, selling personalized planners to students when I was just 16. To my parents, it was nothing more than a cute side project, maybe even a distraction from what they considered real academics. "Camille, why don't you focus on something practical?" my mother would say, catching me up late, sketching out business plans. "Look at your sister. She's doing everything right, applying to the right colleges, networking. That's how you get ahead." My entrepreneurial drive was brushed aside time and again. When I later said I wanted to study hospitality management and business, not accounting, not law, my father didn't even try to hide his disappointment. "That's not a real degree, Abby," he told me one strained evening over dinner. "You want to work in hotels? Be some kind of glorified maid? We didn't raise you for that." Still, even with their criticism ringing in my ears, I didn't back down. I had to put myself through college, while my parents covered every penny of Brielle's Ivy League education and business. To make ends meet, I juggled 3 jobs: early mornings working the front desk at a hotel, classes in the afternoon, and evenings waitressing at a high-end restaurant. Those years drained me physically, but taught me lessons no textbook ever could. It was during my junior year that I met Rachel Winters, a professor in hospitality management who would become my mentor. She saw something in me that my own family never had: pure grit and a sharp instinct for spotting untapped potential in the luxury hospitality world. "You've got an eye for what others miss, Camille," she told me after I presented a case study in class. "Most students just see what's in front of them. You see what something could be." With her support, I landed an internship at the Meridian Hotel Group during my senior year. While many interns fetched coffee and ran errands, I spent my free time studying their operations, identifying inefficiencies, and quietly drafting improvement reports, never expecting anyone to read them. 3 months into the internship, I accidentally left one of my reports on the desk of James Harrison, the regional director. I'd planned to retrieve it before he returned from lunch, but he got to it first. The next day, I was summoned to his office, convinced I was in trouble for overstepping. Instead, James looked me in the eye and offered me a junior management role after graduation. "This report is better than what I get from consultants who cost thousands," he said, tapping the pages. "We need more people who think like you." When I called my parents to share the news, their reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Well, at least you'll have a stable job," my mother said, though management trainee isn't exactly impressive. "Brielle just got a junior analyst offer from Goldman Sachs, you know." After that, I stopped updating them on my career. They never knew I was promoted to hotel manager by 26, or that I created a guest loyalty program that raised Meridian's revenue by 15%. They had no idea when I left my job at 28 to start my own boutique hotel consulting firm, or when, just a year later, I secured enough investment to purchase my first struggling property. The Athena Hotel had once been a grand 5-star destination, but by the time I acquired it, it was bleeding money and long forgotten. I poured my heart into it, completely renovating, rebranding, and reviving it. Within 18 months, it had become the most sought-after boutique hotel in Minneapolis. 6 months later, I added a second property to my portfolio. By the time I turned 32, I owned a small but prestigious collection of luxury hotels across the Midwest. The Athena remained my crown jewel and my home, with the penthouse suite reserved as my personal residence. My parents and Brielle were unaware of any of it. In their eyes, I was still working some modest hotel job, just getting by. I never corrected them. They never asked. And frankly, their assumptions said more about them than they did about me. When it came to my personal life, I kept that private too. My closest companion became Andre Chin, the head of security at the Athena, a brilliant former military intelligence officer with a background in cybersecurity. He quickly became not just my right hand in business, but my most trusted confidant. Our friendship was built on mutual respect and a shared belief in delivering excellence. I dated from time to time, but my true focus was growing the empire I was building. My hotels became my children, my team, and extended family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had created the kind of supportive, appreciative environment my own family never provided. This was the reality as my father's 60th birthday approached. I hadn't attended a family gathering in almost 2 years, always citing work obligations, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely false, but this felt like a moment worth showing up for. Maybe, I thought, it would be a chance to finally close the gap between who they imagined I was and who I had actually become. What I didn't expect was how wide that gap had grown, or how completely it would shatter during the course of one unforgettable evening. 2 months before my father's 60th birthday, I received a group text from my mother that stopped me in my tracks. Planning a surprise dinner for Dad's 60th, considering Giovanni's or the Athena Hotel restaurant. Thoughts? I nearly dropped my phone. The Athena, my Athena, was on her short list. For a fleeting moment, I thought about revealing the truth then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was years of old habits, or maybe I sensed this could be the perfect chance for a far more meaningful reveal. The Athena has a stellar reputation, I replied, keeping it casual. I hear their private dining room is outstanding. My mother texted back quickly. It's very expensive, probably out of our budget, and yours, obviously. Her jab stung, but I was used to it. I could help with the costs, I offered. We don't need charity, Camille, she replied. Your sister is doing quite well at her firm and has offered to pay half. We'll sort out the rest. I swallowed my frustration and offered a more tactful reply, suggesting I could check for potential discounts through industry connections. She reluctantly agreed, exactly the opening I'd hoped for. That same afternoon, I called Miles Porter, my general manager at the Athena. Miles, my family's planning my dad's birthday dinner at our restaurant next month. They have no idea I own the place. Miles let out a laugh. You're kidding. That's either fate or fantastic timing. Probably both, I said. Here's what I need. When they call to book the Whitaker party, reserve our finest private dining room, the Winston Suite. Full service, top shelf everything. But when they ask for pricing, quote them half the actual cost. I'll cover the rest quietly. Got it, he said. And when you arrive, should we introduce you as the owner? I paused, knowing this would be a pivotal moment. No, treat me like any other guest for now. I'll decide when the time is right. In the following weeks, I kept tabs on the planning behind the scenes. My mother called the restaurant several times, negotiating every detail and raising her eyebrows at how reasonable the price seemed for such an upscale venue. Meanwhile, my executive chef designed a custom menu, and I made sure my father's favorite wines would be flowing all night. A week before the dinner, my sister Brielle called me, something she rarely did. So you're actually coming to Dad's birthday? She asked. Her tone edged with disbelief. Of course, I replied. It's a significant occasion. Mom mentioned you got some sort of discount at the Athena. How'd you pull that off? It's not like you're one of their VIP guests. It was the perfect moment to finally tell her the truth. But once again, I paused. Something in her voice, the casual assumption that I couldn't possibly be important, made me want to wait. I wanted the reveal to be on my terms. I've done some consulting work for hotels, I answered vaguely. Industry perks, you know? Her silence spoke volumes, but then she added, well, just make sure you dress appropriately. The Athena is a pretty high-end place. If you don't have anything suitable, I could lend you something. I glanced down at the custom Valentino I'd worn for that day's board meeting and smiled quietly. I'll be fine, I said. Just don't embarrass us, she added, then hung up. Those words would soon take on a meaning she didn't expect. The night before the celebration, my mother called. Camille, we've had to add a few guests. Jim Robertson from your father's golf club, the Clarks from the neighborhood board. Oh, and Brielle's bringing her new boyfriend. He's a junior partner at her firm. Very impressive young man. That's fine, I replied. The dining room can seat up to 20. There was a pause. How would you know that? She asked, suspicion creeping in. I looked up the specs online after you mentioned the venue, I answered smoothly. Well, with the added guests, the bill is getting up there. Since you offered to chip in, we thought it might make more sense if you just handled the gratuity for the staff. That way you can contribute without overextending yourself. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and counted to 10. Of course, Mom. I'll take care of the tip. Wonderful. And Camille, please be on time. The reservation is for 7 o'clock sharp. You know how your father is about punctuality. After we hung up, I sat alone in my office, high above the Minneapolis skyline, reflecting on the evening ahead. A part of me wondered if I was being petty by keeping my success to myself, but another part knew this was more than that. It was a rare chance to quietly confront years of being overlooked. I called Andre, my head of security, and laid out the plan. He chuckled on the other end. You're sure about this? He asked. It's a bit theatrical. Sometimes a little theater makes the message stick, I replied. They've spent years building a story around who they think I am. I'm just letting the truth play out on their stage. As always, he said, I've got your back. Tomorrow's going to be something they won't forget. That night, I slept in the penthouse suite above the Athena, the very hotel my family assumed I couldn't even afford to dine in, much less own. Tomorrow would shift everything, though in ways none of us could quite predict. The evening of my father's birthday unfolded with almost cinematic perfection. A gentle snowfall had begun, casting a soft shimmer over the Athena's stately exterior, highlighting every detail of its lovingly restored Art Deco architecture. I had purposely told my family I'd be running a bit late due to a work commitment, giving myself the space to arrive separately. The real reason? I wanted to watch their arrival on the hotel's security feed. Seated in my private office just off the main kitchen, wearing a deep midnight blue Genchi gown, graceful, understated, but undeniably high-end, I watched the monitors as my family walked through the doors, a full 40 minutes early. My mother, in her usual special occasion outfit, a decade-old St. John suit she reserved for club luncheons and weddings, immediately began assessing everything. The marble floors, the flower arrangements, even the lighting. My father looked slightly out of place, but clearly impressed, nervously adjusting his tie as he took in the grand ceiling murals, pieces I'd personally commissioned from a celebrated artist. Brielle arrived soon after, arm in arm, with her new boyfriend, Landon Pierce. They were dressed like they were stepping into a gala, not a private dinner. Brielle wasted no time taking command, raising her voice at the concierge, gesturing with flair as if she were the host, generously offering instructions on how everything should proceed. From my monitor, I watched Miles, my general manager, greet them warmly and escort them into the Winston suite, where champagne and hors d'oeuvres awaited. Even from a small screen, I could see the surprise flicker across my mother's face. I had approved far more than the modest package she'd believed she was getting. Just then, Nadia Karen, my executive chef, appeared at the office door. Miss Whitaker, she said softly, everything is ready just as you requested. The wine's been decanting for 3 hours, and we've made sure your father's favorite bourbon is set for after dinner. Excellent, Nadia Karen. Thank you, I said, rising and smoothing the fabric of my gown. I believe it's time I made my entrance. As planned, I sent Andre a quick message, signaling him to take his place near the hotel's grand entrance. Then I stepped into my private elevator, exited through a discreet side door, and walked around the block to re-enter the Athena through the main entrance. Just like any other guest, the timing had to be just right. I arrived as the last few guests were checking in at the front desk. Hanging back slightly, I watched as the Robertsons and the Clarks were guided toward the private dining area. Just as I was about to follow them, Brielle appeared from a hallway, likely returning from the restroom. Her eyes landed on me, instantly narrowing with that familiar, calculating look. The smile that spread across her face wasn't warm. It was the same patronizing smirk I'd seen countless times over the years. Camille, so you actually showed up, she said, giving me a slow once-over. Her gaze lingered on my gown, my heels, and the understated but clearly genuine diamond earrings I wore. Wow, you managed to borrow something nice. Hello, Brielle. You look lovely, I said calmly, refusing to rise to the bait. Her expression fell slightly, as if disappointed I hadn't given her something more to pounce on. Mom was half expecting you to back out, she added, or show up in your work clothes, wherever it is you're working these days. I'm exactly where I want to be in my career, I answered truthfully. Sure you are, she muttered, then suddenly stiffened. Her eyes darted past me toward the entrance. Oh no, please tell me you didn't bring a date to Dad's birthday. This is a family dinner, Camille. I turned and saw Andre walking in, polished and poised in a custom-tailored suit. Before I could explain he wasn't attending the dinner, my mother joined us, appearing beside Brielle. Camille, at last, we've been waiting forever. She barely glanced at me before her attention shifted to Andre. And who is this? We didn't plan for extra seating. This is... I started, but Andre smoothly stepped forward. Good evening, Mrs. Whitaker. I'm Andre Chin, head of security here at the Athena. I just needed a quick word with Miss Whitaker. My mother's expression changed in an instant, from irritation to awkward embarrassment. Security, Camille, what's going on now? Before I could speak, Brielle stepped directly into my path, as if physically trying to prevent me from entering the dining room. Is there an issue with her reservation? She asked Andre, deliberately referring to me in the third person. If it's about money, we're happy to cover her part. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice into that pointed whisper that somehow managed to carry across the room with perfect clarity. Camille, please don't embarrass the family. If you're having money troubles again, you should have said something before showing up at a place like this. The lobby had grown noticeably still. A few hotel guests and staff had paused, clearly sensing the tension. Near the restaurant entrance, Miles had appeared, observing the scene with a faint, amused smile. He caught my eye and lifted a questioning eyebrow. I responded with the slightest nod. Actually, Andre said evenly, his tone calm and professional. I simply wanted to let Miss Whitaker know that all her special arrangements for the evening have been carried out exactly as requested. Special arrangements? My mother echoed, looking puzzled. What are you talking about? Brielle rolled her eyes. Mom, she probably asked them to serve the cheapest wine on the menu or something. Can we please go back to the dinner? Landon Pierce is telling Dad about his new BMW. She reached for our mother's arm, trying to guide her away while still standing squarely in front of me. That's when Andre cleared his throat deliberately. Mrs. Whitaker, Miss Brielle, perhaps you're not aware that you are currently preventing the owner of this hotel from entering her own property. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother froze in place. Brielle turned slowly toward me, her face caught somewhere between confusion and dawning realization. Excuse me? My mother finally said, barely above a whisper. Right on cue, Miles stepped forward with polished professionalism, offering me his hand in greeting. Miss Whitaker, everything is set for your father's celebration. The chef has included all your requests, and the 1962 Bordeaux from your personal collection pairs beautifully with the prime rib. My mother's face had gone pale. Your personal collection? She echoed, unsteady. I smiled as I calmly stepped around my sister, who was too stunned to move. Yes, Mom, from my private wine cellar here at the Athena. I've been meaning to tell you, I own this hotel. I also own the Meridian downtown, and 4 others across the Midwest. Brielle opened her mouth, but no words came out. My mother reached for the nearest chair to steady herself. That's not possible, she murmured. And yet, here we are, I said gently, motioning toward the restaurant entrance. Shall we go join Dad and the rest? We do have a birthday to celebrate. As we made our way to the private dining room, every staff member we passed greeted me warmly by name. These weren't the forced pleasantries given to any hotel guest, but genuine acknowledgments, respectful, familiar, and filled with quiet admiration. A soft chorus followed us down the hallway. Good evening, Miss Whitaker. Lovely to see you, Miss Whitaker. Each word carried weight, making it impossible for my family to deny what was now so plainly visible. Just as we reached the doors of the Winston suite, Brielle grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, almost painful. Why didn't you tell us? She whispered, her earlier smugness gone without a trace. I glanced at her hand until she let go, then calmly smoothed my sleeve before meeting her eyes. You never asked, I said simply. None of you ever did. And with that, I opened the doors and stepped inside. My father looked up, his face shifting from mild confusion to complete astonishment as the staff welcomed me, not as a guest, but as the woman who ran the entire operation. The evening was far from over, The rest of the birthday dinner played out like a scene from a surreal play, one where half the cast had never seen the full script. My father, though momentarily stunned by the attention I received, adjusted more quickly than my mother or sister. Over the course of the evening, his disbelief softened into something that looked very much like pride. Later, during a quieter moment by the dessert table, he approached me. "So this is what you've been so secretive about," he said, glancing around. "You really own this entire place?" "I do," I replied. "This one and several others." I watched his eyes widen with realization. "But why keep that from us?" he asked, not with accusation but genuine curiosity, so different from the defensiveness I'd come to expect. I paused before answering, choosing my words carefully. At first I wasn't sure I'd make it, and then when I did, I realized you all already had a picture in your minds of who I was and what I was capable of. After a while, it just felt easier to let you keep believing it. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful, even regretful. "I suppose we haven't given you much reason to share your accomplishments." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from anyone in my family. Before I could respond, my mother appeared beside us, her composure carefully restored after the earlier shock. "Camille, the Clarks are asking about the historical photographs in the hallway. Since you seem to know everything about this place, perhaps you'd like to enlighten them." Her voice was tight, her smile polite but strained. I nodded and excused myself to greet the guests, catching the sound of my father quietly asking, "Did you know anything about this?" "Of course not," my mother replied sharply. "She's clearly gone out of her way to keep us in the dark, just to make this grand display." The rest of the evening followed much the same pattern. My mother wore a mask of graciousness, though her eyes flickered with disbelief and what looked like wounded pride. Brielle shifted between awkward attempts to align herself with my success and long stretches of sulking silence. My father, meanwhile, grew more intrigued with every passing detail, asking thoughtful questions and listening with real interest as he learned about the scope of what I'd built. By the time dessert arrived, a bourbon caramel cake specially crafted for my father, the room had quietly split into two camps, those genuinely impressed by what I had accomplished, and those clearly unsettled by it. The Robertsons and Clarks asked one question after another about the hotel business, eager to learn more. At the same table, my mother and Brielle sat stiffly, speaking little, while Landon Pierce shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing between them. When the celebration finally wound down near midnight, I gave instructions to Miles to see that each guest received a luxury gift basket and a ride home. My father pulled me into a warm embrace before leaving and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Abby." His voice was quiet but sincere. Then my mother, lips pressed tightly together, ushered him away. Brielle lingered behind, clearly grappling with what to say. "So all those times we thought you couldn't afford to join family trips or chip in for gifts." "I was building this," I said, gesturing around the elegant room, and for the record, I did send gifts. The Hawaii trip for Mom and Dad's anniversary, the generous Christmas checks. Those were from me. Brielle looked genuinely puzzled. "Mom said they were from some cousin who'd come into money." I gave a dry laugh. Of course she did. The idea that I might succeed without her influence, well, that's never been easy for her to accept. At that moment, Landon Pierce stepped forward and gently touched Brielle's shoulder. "We should head out. The car's waiting." Then turning to me, he added with genuine warmth, "You've built something remarkable here. Really impressive." Brielle shot him a glance I couldn't quite read, then turned back to me. "We should talk soon," she said quietly. After they left, I made my way back to my office, slipped off my heels, and poured myself a generous glass of the same Bordeaux we'd served at dinner. A moment later, Andre tapped gently on the door before stepping in and taking a seat across from me. He loosened his tie, leaned back, and said with a half-smile, "Well, that was quite an evening. How are you feeling?" I took a moment to think, swirling the wine in my glass. Relieved, vindicated, drained, and a little sad, I admitted before taking a sip. Honestly, a mix of everything. "Your father seemed to take it better than expected," he said. "He did," I nodded. "He's always been more level-headed than my mother or Brielle, just never enough to actually speak up for me when it counted." Andre nodded in quiet understanding. "So, what happens tomorrow when the shock wears off?" That was the real question. Tonight's reveal had been powerful, satisfying even, but I knew it wouldn't end here. Family dynamics have the way of reasserting themselves, especially when old narratives are challenged. This was just the beginning of a much deeper shift. I imagine I'll start getting calls early, I said. Mom will either want a full explanation, or she'll try to rewrite the story, insisting she always believed in me. Brielle will bounce between resentment and trying to leverage her connection to me. And how do you plan to handle that? He asked. I set down my glass and felt a quiet certainty settle over me. I'm going to establish boundaries, clear ones, for the first time in my life. I looked over at him, not out of spite, not to gloat, but because it's time they respected who I am and what I've built. Over the next couple of hours, Andre and I mapped out a thoughtful plan. Not one built on retaliation, but on self-protection. A way to move forward with dignity, leaving room for healthier relationships, if they were willing. I also decided to schedule a session with Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the therapist I'd started seeing shortly after buying my first hotel. I wanted to make sure I approached this from a place of growth, not defensiveness. As expected, the calls began early, 7:03 a.m. to be exact. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Moments later, a text from Brielle lit up my screen. We need to talk. Can I come by the hotel today? I didn't respond to either right away. Instead, I called Dr. Hayes to schedule an urgent session for that afternoon. By the time I arrived at her office overlooking Loring Park, my phone showed 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and 1 email from my father. It simply read, I owe you an apology, many in fact. When you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen. That email, so measured and sincere, stood in stark contrast to my mother's demanding voicemails and Brielle's back-and-forth messages, alternating between blame and charm. It gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, one relationship could be rebuilt. The question isn't whether to forgive them, Dr. Hayes said after I'd shared the events of the previous night. The real question is, what kind of relationship do you want from here on out? And what boundaries will you need to keep that relationship healthy for you? By the end of the session, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't about settling scores. It wasn't about forcing anyone to acknowledge past wounds. It was about building a new kind of relationship, one where my independence was honored, my accomplishments respected, and where old patterns of disregard could no longer find a foothold. That evening, back at the Athena, I instructed the front desk staff to notify me immediately if any family member arrived without notice. Then I settled into the living room of my penthouse, overlooking the city I'd built a life in, on my own terms, and replied to my father's email with a clear, simple message. I'm ready to talk, alone, tomorrow at 2 p.m. in my office at the Athena. It was time to reshape my family ties with the same clarity and conviction I'd used to build my career, anchored by firm boundaries, a steady hand, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who I am and what I'm worth. My father arrived for our meeting 10 minutes early, a habit no doubt formed from decades of client meetings at his accounting firm. Miles greeted him at the lobby and brought him to my office, where I had coffee and his favorite cookies from a local bakery waiting. He paused at the window, taking in the expansive view of the Minneapolis skyline. This is quite a view, he said softly. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence, less towering than the father I remembered from childhood. That's why I chose this office, I replied, motioning toward a chair. I wanted a daily reminder of what I was working toward. A quiet settled between us, 32 years of misunderstandings, silence, and unspoken words lingering in the space between. At last, my father cleared his throat. I don't quite know where to begin, Camille. I'm still wrapping my head around it all, the hotels, your success, and the fact that you felt you couldn't share any of it with us. He paused, carefully weighing his words. I tried, Dad, I replied, keeping my voice steady, more focused on facts than feelings. When I landed my first management job, when I launched my consulting firm, when I bought this hotel, I called home each time. The response was always the same, at best, brushed off, at worst, quietly discouraged. He looked genuinely taken aback. I don't remember that. When I told Mom about my promotion to hotel manager, she said, well, at least it's steady work, and then changed the subject to Brielle's new apartment. When I mentioned starting my firm, you asked if I had a backup plan for when it failed. Eventually, it felt pointless to keep sharing. A flush of awareness crossed his face. Guilt, maybe shame. I remember now, he said quietly. I didn't realize. I thought we were being practical, encouraging you to be realistic. You were practical with me, I said evenly. But with Brielle, you were hopeful. You spoke of ambition, praised her drive, supported her choices. We were held to different standards, offered different kinds of encouragement. To my surprise, he didn't push back. Instead, he nodded slowly. Your mother and I, we understood Brielle's world, the corporate ladder, the networking, the traditional symbols of success. Your path, it seemed so, he paused. Unconventional, I offered. Yes, and we worried. Maybe we questioned your direction because it made us uncomfortable. And instead of facing that discomfort, we doubted you. He looked at me then, truly looked at me. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. I was wrong. We were wrong. What you've built here, Camille, is remarkable. The simplicity of that statement, so long overdue, hit me harder than I'd expected. I blinked back a sudden wave of emotion. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. He nodded, then continued. Your mother's having a hard time with all this. I think she feels deceived. And Brielle? His voice trailed off, unsure of how to define her reaction. They both probably feel threatened, I said gently. This shakes up a family structure that's been comfortable for them, but their discomfort isn't mine to fix. He gave a slow nod. So, but what happens now? With Dr. Hayes' guidance, I laid out the personal boundaries I intended to uphold moving forward. I would engage with each family member on an individual basis, rather than as part of a collective unit, and I would decline invitations to gatherings where my achievements or lifestyle were likely to be dismissed or ridiculed. I would be open about my success from now on, but I would no longer tolerate any attempt to tap into my resources without honoring my independence. When I finished, my father nodded. That all sounds more than fair, especially considering everything that's happened. I've also arranged meetings with my attorney tomorrow, I added, to officially remove the anonymity from several gifts I've given the family over the years. The Hawaii trip, the Christmas checks, and the contributions to your retirement fund. His eyes widened at that last part. Those extra returns we saw the past few years, that was you? Yes, I've been quietly supplementing your retirement since I sold my second hotel. I wanted you and Mom to have peace of mind, but I knew she wouldn't accept help if she knew it came from me. My father sat back, visibly shaken and humbled. All this time, we've treated you like the one who never quite measured up. And yet you've been the one supporting us behind the scenes. I didn't do it for thanks or recognition, I said gently. I did it because I could, and because, despite everything, you're still my family. But moving forward, I want full transparency. No more anonymous gifts. No more pretending I'm something less than I am. He agreed without hesitation. Our conversation eventually shifted to lighter ground, his birthday dinner. He admitted he'd truly enjoyed it once the initial shock wore off, especially witnessing the deep respect my team clearly had for me. Your mother kept insisting you must have tricked us somehow, he said, shaking his head. She couldn't believe the hotel was actually yours. And what did you say? I asked. I told her it was time to accept what was plainly in front of her, he said with a sigh. She didn't take that well. After he left, promising to reflect on everything we'd discussed, I spent the afternoon in a string of meetings, each one aimed at securing the new foundation I was building. Sarah Jenkins, my attorney, helped draft formal letters detailing previous financial gifts and outlining firm boundaries for any future support. My financial advisor, Marcus Williams, reviewed my holdings to ensure that my personal generosity wouldn't interfere with the health of my businesses. And Dr. Hayes helped me prepare emotionally, especially for the inevitable and likely difficult conversation with my mother, who I knew would resist the shift more than anyone. By the end of the day, as Andre jokingly called it, Operation Family Reset was complete. For the first time in my life, when it came to my family, I felt grounded, steady, and entirely in control of my own story. I instructed Miles to let the front desk know that if my mother or sister showed up, they were to be welcomed in, but not given any details about my schedule or whereabouts. And just as expected, my mother arrived the next morning without notice, clearly assuming she'd be shown straight to my office. Mrs. Whitaker, Miles greeted her with flawless professionalism. Do you have an appointment with Miss Whitaker today? Even through the security monitor in my office, I could see the disbelief flash across her face. I don't need an appointment. I'm her mother. I understand completely, Miles replied calmly. But Miss Whitaker is currently in meetings. I'd be happy to check her availability later today, or set something up for tomorrow. It was such a basic boundary. Nothing unusual in a professional setting, but for her, it seemed almost offensive. She protested for several minutes, her tone growing increasingly agitated, before finally leaving in frustration. As she exited, she informed Miles, in no uncertain terms, that she would handle this with Camille directly. Not 5 minutes later, my phone rang. This time I answered. Hello, Mom. What on earth is going on, Camille? I just stopped by this hotel of yours, and I was treated like a complete outsider. You were treated the same as any visitor without an appointment, I replied gently. This is my place of business, Mom. I have meetings, obligations, and a schedule to keep. I'm your mother. I shouldn't need an appointment to see my own daughter. Would you walk into Brielle's law firm unannounced and expect to be brought straight into her office? There was a pause, long enough to tell me the message had landed. That's different, she said at last, though without much conviction. It's really not, I replied. My work, my business, my career, they deserve the same respect you've always given Brielle's. Another silence. Then carefully she said, We need to talk about what happened at your father's birthday, as a family. I'm willing to have that conversation, Mom, I said, but not until you're ready to acknowledge some hard truths about the way I've been treated and the way my choices have been dismissed over the years. It is about that, I said gently but firmly. I'm not angry, and this isn't about punishing anyone. But I am putting boundaries in place, ones that should have been there a long time ago. By the end of the call, we'd agreed to meet the following week, with Dr. Hayes present as a neutral party. It wasn't exactly what my mother had in mind, but she understood, at least on some level, that I was no longer the daughter who could be brushed aside or quietly controlled. Brielle proved to be more adaptable than expected, though not necessarily more sincere. She showed up at the Athena later that afternoon, Landon Pierce by her side, asking cheerfully for a tour of my sister's incredible hotel. The shift from past condescension to this sudden burst of sisterly pride was almost too obvious, but I chose to see it as a potential step forward, however cautious. As I guided them through the property, Brielle filled the air with questions about the business model, the clientele, the profit margins. It was clear she was sizing up just how far I'd come. Landon Pierce, on the other hand, seemed genuinely interested. He asked thoughtful questions about the hospitality industry and my approach to management. His curiosity felt sincere, not strategic. As we wrapped up the tour in the rooftop garden I'd added the previous spring, Brielle turned to me with a bright smile. You know, she said, we should talk about some possible collaborations. My firm's always on the lookout for top-tier venues for client events. And of course, family discounts would be a win-win. There it was, the real reason for her visit. Not reconciliation, not a true desire to understand my world, but to explore how my success might be used to her advantage. I don't offer family discounts, I said, my tone warm but unwavering. The Athena operates with consistent pricing for all our clients, but your firm is welcome to book through our corporate events department, just like any other organization. Her smile flickered just briefly. But surely you could make an exception for your sister? I care about our relationship, I said gently, and that's exactly why I avoid mixing family and business. In my experience, both flourish best when the boundaries are clear. Landon Pierce gave a quiet nod of agreement, which earned him a sharp glance from Brielle. The rest of their visit unfolded without incident, but the message had been delivered, just as it had been with our parents. I was willing to have a relationship, but only one grounded in mutual respect and clearly defined lines. I began just as Dr. Hayes and I had discussed, calmly, without accusation, describing what it had felt like to grow up as the child who was constantly overlooked. I spoke about the repeated dismissal of my career choices and the long-standing pattern of downplaying my accomplishments while consistently highlighting Brielle's. I didn't dramatize, I simply shared the facts as I had lived them. While I was holding down 3 jobs to put myself through college, I said evenly, you covered all of Brielle's tuition and housing at Cornell. When I called to tell you I'd been promoted to my first management position, the conversation immediately shifted to Brielle's new apartment. And when I shared that I'd launched my own consulting firm, Dad's first response was to ask if I had a fallback plan in case it didn't work out. As I spoke, I saw my mother's face grow visibly flushed. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, clasping and unclasping, though she said nothing for now. When I finished speaking, Dr. Hayes gently turned to my mother. "Evelyn, would you like to respond to what Camille has shared?" My mother straightened in her seat, her voice tightly composed. "I think there's been some misunderstanding of our intentions. We've always wanted what was best for both of our daughters. Maybe we voiced more concern about Camille's choices because they seemed more uncertain, less traditional." "It wasn't the concern that hurt," I replied calmly. "It was the underlying assumption that I would fail, the absence of encouragement, the constant measuring of my path against Brielle's more acceptable one." "We did support you," my mother snapped, her composure beginning to crack. "We gave you a good home, a solid education through high school," my father spoke quietly. "We also had Camille pay her way through college, while we covered everything for Brielle." My mother turned toward him, clearly stunned, her expression tinged with betrayal. "That was different. Brielle went to an Ivy League school. The costs were much higher." "All the more reason I could have used help," I said gently. And so the conversation continued. Nearly an hour of back and forth. My mother shifted between defensiveness and denial, while my father grew increasingly thoughtful and, to his credit, began to acknowledge the imbalances. I held my ground, calm, consistent, but willing to listen. Dr. Hayes kept the discussion from veering off course, redirecting us toward healing rather than blame. The turning point came when my mother finally said aloud what had been simmering beneath the surface. "Why did you keep your success from us?" she asked, her voice tight. "Do you know how humiliating it was to find out, with our friends present, that you own multiple hotels, that you've been keeping this from us for years?" "I didn't lie," I said evenly. "I simply stopped sharing. There's a difference." "But why?" she asked again, and this time there was real confusion behind the frustration. "Because every time I did share, it was dismissed, minimized, or brushed aside. After a while, it became clear that my success didn't match the version of me you were comfortable with. And it was easier, less painful, not to keep proving myself to people who refused to see me clearly." Something in my response must have landed. For the first time that afternoon, my mother fell quiet. Her gaze dropped to her hands, and she said nothing at all. "I never looked at it that way," my mother said at last, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I always saw myself as the practical one, the realist, trying to keep everyone grounded." "For Brielle, you were her biggest cheerleader," I replied gently. "For me, you were the constant voice of caution, of doubt. And the truth is, both of your daughters needed a little of both, just at different times." My father reached over and took her hand, giving it a soft squeeze. "She's right, Evelyn. We've treated them differently from the very beginning. We expected Camille to stumble and Brielle to soar. And in some ways, they lived up to those expectations. Brielle by following the path we laid out, and Camille by rising on her own, without the support she deserved." That simple, honest admission seemed to hang in the room like a shift in the air, subtle but powerful. My mother's eyes welled up, something I could count on one hand the number of times I'd seen. "I don't know how to fix this," she murmured. "It begins with acknowledgement," Dr. Hayes said gently, "and you've taken that first step today. The rest comes from creating new patterns, ways of relating that are more respectful and more honest." Over the next hour, we talked through what that might look like. My parents agreed to respect my professional boundaries, to recognize my accomplishments without backhanded comparisons, and to stop viewing everything I did through the lens of how it stacked up against Brielle's journey. In turn, I committed to staying open, to share my life and successes honestly, rather than retreat in silence. Our goal would be to build a relationship rooted in who we are now, not who we were or who we were expected to be. "And Brielle?" my mother asked at last, her voice still tentative. "She's struggling with all this too." "My relationship with Brielle is separate," I said. "We'll have to figure out our own path, in our own time." As the session drew to a close, Dr. Hayes suggested we take a week to reflect before meeting again. As we gathered our things, my father embraced me warmly. Then, after a brief pause, my mother approached, more carefully, but with intention. "Your hotel is beautiful," she said, the words clearly not easy for her. "I'd like to learn more about what you've built." if you're open to that. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was something real. I'd like that, I said. 3 days later, Brielle asked to meet, just the two of us, without Landon Pierce or our parents. We chose a quiet cafe halfway between her law office and the Athena, neutral ground for a conversation that turned out to be more difficult than the one I'd had with our parents. I don't understand why you're doing all this, she said, diving straight in, stirring up family tension, making Mom and Dad feel guilty. I'm not doing anything to them, I answered calmly. I'm simply setting up honest and respectful relationships after years of being overlooked. They've always supported us. They've always supported you, I gently corrected. There's a difference. Her expression shifted, the initial defensiveness giving way to something more unsure. I never asked to be the favorite, she said. I know, I replied. But you never questioned it either. When they praised your traditional choices and dismissed my unconventional ones. When they funded your education and I worked 3 jobs. When they celebrated your milestones while brushing past mine. You accepted all of it like it was just the way things were. She went quiet, stirring her latte with more focus than usual. I didn't realize how different things felt for you, she finally said. From where I stood, you always seemed so self-sufficient, like you didn't want or need anyone's approval. I became self-sufficient because I had no choice, I explained. And then that independence was used as proof I didn't deserve the kind of support that came naturally to you. We talked for nearly 2 hours, more honestly than we ever had as adults. While Brielle never completely owned her role in the family dynamic, she did express a genuine interest in forging a more balanced relationship going forward. I can't promise I'll get it right away, she said as we got up to leave. Old habits die hard. I'm not asking for perfection, I assured her. Just effort and awareness. Over the next week, I noticed small but meaningful changes. My father called to ask thoughtful questions about my business model, clearly wanting to understand the work I do. My mother sent a handwritten note, apologizing for how she reacted at the birthday dinner and asking if I'd give her a proper tour of the Athena whenever your schedule allows. Brielle texted me about having lunch, this time with no hidden agenda about using the hotel for business. Andre took these developments in stride. Family dynamics don't change overnight, he said cautiously. There'll be setbacks, old habits resurfacing. I know, I nodded, but for the first time, I feel like they're actually seeing me, not just who they thought I was supposed to be. And if they slip back into old patterns, he asked, ever practical, then I keep my boundaries intact, I said, with more confidence than I'd ever felt before. The difference now is that I've made them clear, so if they're crossed, it's not unconscious anymore. It's a choice. The true test came a month later when my mother hosted a family dinner, the first since everything had come to light at my father's birthday. I arrived prepared for possible backsliding, but to my surprise, the tone had subtly shifted. My mother had framed and displayed several magazine articles featuring my hotels, placing them beside Brielle's law school diploma and her firm's partnership announcement. My father asked for my opinion on an investment opportunity, genuinely seeking my insight as a businesswoman. Even Brielle made an effort, bringing up a client who had stayed at the Athena and couldn't stop talking about the exceptional experience. But the most telling moment came over dessert. My mother mentioned a fundraising gala she was helping organize. We'd love to have your support, Camille, she said. Then she paused and added, not just because of your resources, but because it's a cause I believe would speak to you, given your support for women's entrepreneurship programs. It was a small change in language, but it meant everything. She was no longer speaking to me as a resource, but as a person, someone with values, with purpose, and with a voice she was finally beginning to hear. As I drove home that evening, I found myself reflecting on the road I'd traveled these past few months. The big reveal at my father's birthday dinner had certainly been dramatic. Some might even call it theatrical, but the true transformation had taken place in the quiet, everyday moments that followed. The honest conversations, the setting of firm boundaries, and the slow but steady rebuilding of relationships on more genuine ground. What began as a desire for vindication after years of being overlooked had evolved into something far more meaningful, real recognition and earned respect. Not just because I owned elegant hotels or had reached a level of financial success, but because I had finally insisted on being seen for who I truly was, beyond the titles, beyond the achievements. Our family dynamic was still far from perfect, and it likely always would be, but something had shifted. Where there was once automatic dismissal, there was now a conscious effort. And in the realm of family, that shift, however imperfect, felt like nothing short of a quiet revolution. That night, as I stepped into my penthouse, a sense of peace settled over me, one I hadn't felt in years. The city lights of Minneapolis sparkled across the skyline, a glittering reminder of everything I'd built despite the doubts, despite the resistance. Some say the best revenge is living well, but I had discovered something even stronger. Living authentically is the best resolution. 6 months after that unforgettable evening, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The city below was bathed in golden light, the perfect backdrop for reflection. So much had changed since that night, though not without its challenges. There had been slip-ups, moments when my mother reverted to old habits of comparison, when Brielle's competitive streak reappeared, when long-standing family dynamics threatened to creep back in. But now, instead of ignoring these moments or brushing them aside, we faced them, we acknowledged them, we worked through them. That in itself was progress. My relationship with my father had grown the most. With some distance from my mother's stronger personality, he began showing up at the Athena regularly, not to critique, but to learn. He asked thoughtful questions, showed genuine interest in the business, and even offered accounting insights. But this time, not in a condescending way. Instead, he spoke to me as one professional to another. "I never gave you the credit you deserved," he told me one afternoon over our monthly lunch. "I was so fixated on what I thought success should look like, I didn't recognize you were building something even better." My mother's shift had been more gradual, but no less meaningful. She no longer dismissed my career or made unfavorable comparisons to Brielle, though at times I could still see her struggling to fully grasp the scale of what I had accomplished. What mattered, however, was that she was trying. She began asking questions, admitting when she didn't understand, and visiting my hotels with genuine curiosity instead of quiet skepticism. "I've been telling everyone at the country club about the Athena," she said proudly during a recent phone call. "Cynthia Blackwell was absolutely green with envy when I told her my daughter owns it." There was still a hint of vicarious pride in her voice, but I had come to accept that full understanding might always be just out of reach for us. Still, the difference between being disregarded and being imperfectly supported felt like real progress. Brielle and I had settled into a more honest, if occasionally awkward, relationship. The competitive undercurrent between us hadn't disappeared completely, but naming it had taken away much of its sting. We had even joined forces on a charity fundraiser held at the Athena, blending her legal network with my expertise in hospitality. It was a partnership neither of us could have imagined a year earlier. "We actually make a pretty good team when we're not trying to one-up each other," she'd said as we wrapped up the successful event. "We always could have," I replied. "We just never gave ourselves the chance." Then outside of family, my professional world continued to thrive. Over the last 6 months, I had acquired 2 more properties, bringing my total to 9 luxury hotels across the Midwest. Andre had been promoted to Chief Operations Officer for the entire group, overseeing both security and guest experience at all locations. Perhaps most meaningful, though, was the launch of the Whitaker Women in Hospitality Foundation, a program offering scholarships and mentorship to young women pursuing careers in the industry. That fall, our first group of 10 scholarship recipients began their studies, each one paired with an accomplished female mentor from different sectors of hospitality. "You're building the support system you never had," Dr. Hayes remarked during one of our monthly check-ins. "You're transforming personal pain into something lasting." "I know," I said, "and it feels a lot more productive than staying angry about what I didn't get." My personal life had begun to grow and evolve too. After years of putting my career at the center of everything, I found myself in a relationship with James Bennett, an architectural restoration expert I'd met during the renovation of my Chicago property. Unlike past relationships that couldn't withstand the demands of my work, James understood the passion and dedication it takes to build something worthwhile. "Balance doesn't mean dividing time equally," he said on our 3rd date. "It means giving equal respect to what matters most to each person." That perspective became the foundation of our relationship. We didn't compete for space in each other's lives. We supported one another. And for the first time, my personal and professional worlds coexisted without tension or compromise. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, I heard the soft sound of the penthouse door opening, Andre arriving for our weekly strategy dinner. He stepped out onto the balcony, handing me a glass of wine. "Admiring your empire?" he teased. "Reflecting on the journey," I said, accepting the glass. "Both the business and everything else." He leaned against the railing. "Any regrets about how it all came to light, with a dramatic reveal rather than something more subtle?" I paused to consider. "No, I think the drama was necessary. My family had spent decades dismissing me. That kind of comfort needed to be shaken before anything real could change." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of change, your mother called the front desk today. She actually booked an appointment for next week instead of demanding to be seen on the spot." I laughed. Progress comes in many forms. Later that night, after we'd gone over expansion plans and reviewed the latest operational reports, I checked my email. There was a message from my father waiting for me. He had attached an article highlighting women leaders in the hospitality industry, an article in which I'd been prominently featured. "So proud of what you've built," the message read. "Not just the hotels, but the foundation, the mentorship programs, all of it. You've created success on your own terms, and that's far more admirable than following anyone else's path." Brielle and I were just talking yesterday. She said your approach to business has inspired her to think more creatively in her own legal career. You've had more of an impact on all of us than you probably realize. As I finished reading, I felt tears rising, not from pain or unresolved hurt, but from the quiet beauty of finally being seen, fully and truly, for who I was. What I came to realize over the past few months is that traditional revenge was never what I truly longed for. The idea of making my family regret how they dismissed me was, for a time, a satisfying fantasy. But in the end, it was the quiet, steady work of building healthier relationships that brought real peace. What I had yearned for wasn't their remorse, but their recognition. Not of my financial accomplishments, but of my worth as a person, capable of making valid decisions and achieving meaningful goals. That recognition finally came, not perfectly, not all at once, but genuinely. And it didn't arrive because I forced it with a grand reveal. It came because I created the conditions for it to grow, through honest conversations and clear, respectful boundaries. In truth, the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't to make others sorry. It's to reach a place where their opinions no longer define your sense of value. My family's validation, once so desperately desired, had become a gift rather than a need. I had already laid the foundation of my own self-worth, brick by brick, just like the hotels I had built, each one a reflection of my resilience and vision. Later that night, as I got ready for bed, my thoughts turned to the young women in my foundation's mentorship program. Many of them faced the same doubts I once carried, the same voices questioning their dreams. What I can offer them, beyond scholarships or career opportunities, is the deeper truth I've lived. Other people's doubts don't have to become your own limits. Have you ever been underestimated by those who were supposed to believe in you most? How did you respond? Did you withdraw, get angry, or channel it into determination to rise above it? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below if anything I've shared speaks to your experience. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. The hardest lessons often come from the deepest wounds, and I'm grateful you've let me share mine. Until next time, remember, real success isn't measured by the applause of others, but by the life you build with conviction on your own terms.